Hello everybody, you're very welcome back to the channel. Now let's do this. We don't do too many of these this year, but let's have a quick review of yesterday's Mexican Grand Prix. I've seen a lot of criticism online for this race saying that it was potentially the most boring race of the year. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. There are certainly a lot of what ifs associated with this race, and maybe we can get into a few of those. I think for me, the biggest what if was around the pit strategy. We just didn't know what the pit strategy was going to be. It looked like most cars, well, let's talk about the Ferraris and the Red Bulls. It looked like they had opted for a two-stopper strategy, which was the standard two-stop strategy that Pirelli were proposing before the race had started, where they started on the soft tires and they would switch to the medium tires, and then they would do another switch for medium tires before the end of the race. As it transpired, it was Mercedes who were on an alternative strategy, and looking at what Pirelli were originally proposing before the race, that looked like Mercedes starting on the, let me get this right, medium tire this time, and then switching at their first stop to the hard tires and going all the way to the end on the hard tires. What actually happened was we saw a number of cars run very deep into the race on the soft tires. So the tires were hanging on for a lot longer than we had anticipated or originally thought was possible, certainly based on the information that was coming through from Pirelli. Now, a lot of teams saw this and reacted. So, for example, we saw that the Red Bull decided to leave out, I think it was Perez, they left out longer than Verstappen. And it worked pretty well for them. Now, the big comparison here, and another what if Mercedes had decided to actually watch what was going on the track instead of sticking rigidly to their strategy that they had come up with before the race? Because it seemed like for once there was very little flexibility on the Mercedes side. They're usually the ones on top of strategy, but not so much yesterday. They went with it. They went with the what do we call it? The standard pre-specified strategy, and it worked okay for them. Second and fourth for both of the Mercedes drivers. So I suppose you can't argue too much with that. However, they didn't ever look like challenging for the race win. So what if Mercedes had, let's say, pitted for starting on the medium? What could they have done? They could have pitted again for medium tires and gone onto a soft towards the end. Certainly something that would have made them faster and a little bit more competitive. And by default, they would have probably then pushed Red Bull into a two-stopper. What transpired was Red Bull switched from the soft tires to the medium tires and didn't need to stop again for the rest of the race. So it worked very well for them in that regard. And Verstappen was just slowly but surely pulling away. The deltas weren't hugely different between the two cars, Red Bull and Mercedes, throughout the race. But Verstappen managed to get that little bit ahead, and he just widened the gap as time went on. So those are two of the big what ifs around strategy. What if Mercedes had done something else? And of course, what was going to happen was the big question. So for me, a lot of the enjoyment of yesterday's race came down to this whole speculation, the unknown. They say it's Halloween. They say some of the best horror movies are the ones that build up tension and nothing ever happens in them. So I kind of got a sense that that was happening during yesterday's race. Anyway, moving away from that, were there any other what ifs? Plenty of what ifs. What if Ricciardo had not gotten a penalty? Where could he have finished? Well, actually, in the end, he was 49 seconds behind Leclerc in 7th place. So even if he hadn't gotten the penalty, he probably wouldn't have beaten Leclerc. So in hindsight, and I was very critical on him during the watch along, I basically told him he might as well just park the car and retire at that point. Ricciardo had a fantastic race, and look, I'll acknowledge I was wrong, and I did, of course, award him my driver of the day, and I was very happy to see that he was the official Formula One driver of the day as well. Makes a lot of sense. He had a monster of a race. Not only did he take a 10-second penalty at the very end and still maintain his position in 7th, he completely dominated his teammate. For once, we see this so rarely, and it's kind of what we were expecting to see from Ricciardo for a very, very long time, and it never happened until yesterday. And even you could argue the race that Ricciardo won last season, the Italian Grand Prix, he didn't dominate his teammate as much as he did yesterday. You know, he just about he won the race. What more can you do? But Norris wasn't that far behind him anyway. It's interesting the way these things always happen when next season has already been settled. So as it stands, one seat remaining. It's the Haas seat. Mick Schumacher, maybe he'll get it, maybe he won't. He hasn't been super impressive over the last few races, but it just looks set that Ricciardo won't get that seat. Ricciardo hasn't reached out to Haas. He seems resigned to the fact that he is going to be taking a sabbatical next year. Sabbaticals make me nervous because I don't ever see the drivers coming back. It's very rare. You look at Nico Hülkenberg, maybe as a reserve driver, you get a shot again. But a lot of these drivers, unless you're a Kimi Raikkonen or a Fernando Alonso or a Michael Schumacher, cars aren't really looking for you. You're damaged goods, particularly in the case of Daniel Ricciardo. But anyway, that is what it's at. Looking ahead, so we have a race in 2 weeks' time, the Brazilian Grand Prix, another very short circuit again. Not fully sure what to expect there. I would like to think that Mercedes can potentially step it up a little bit more. Lewis Hamilton really loves that circuit, so we could get a little bit of a race out of it. But I'm not once again super confident. You can see this guy here on the screen, I should say. This guy. No, here. This guy here on the screen. Max Verstappen. He, of course, set a new record, winning 14 races in one season. So he's overtaken Michael Schumacher and Sebastian Vettel with that record. And to be honest with you, I could easily see him winning 16 races this season. Just the form he's in at the moment, he's doing very, very well. And he's been fantastic all season. There is certainly a shadow with everything that's going on with the cost cap and Red Bull and all the rest. But you can't really take away from what they've done this season, unless it transpires next season that they've gone over the cost cap again, in which case probably some serious action needs to be taken against Red Bull. I would view this season very much as a slap on the wrist. What happened? They were never going to overturn the Abu Dhabi result. Unfortunately, let's call a spade a spade. That's just not going to happen. But this season they have been so good, and Max Verstappen in particular. Perez has shown flashes of brilliance. I think that's possibly more down to the car being brilliant than Perez being brilliant. It's disappointing. I like Perez a lot. I was hoping for a little bit better from him this season. And I think actually looking at the Mexican Grand Prix, this really reflects the season that Sergio Perez has had. Very high hopes for him as the local or the national hero to do something. And, he got on the podium. He got third place, the same as last year, but he didn't ever look like he was pushing Max Verstappen. Coming back to the what ifs, though, and maybe I'll finish up on this one. What if Perez managed to overtake Lewis Hamilton for second place? This looked very likely at one stage during the race, where it looked like Perez had a bit more pace than Hamilton. But he never really caught him. He never got within 1 second of Hamilton. And I think maybe he did for 1 or 2 laps and he was in the DRS zone, but he fell away then very quickly again. In the end, it was a 2.9 second gap actually between Hamilton and Perez, as it turns out. But if Perez had gotten past Hamilton, do you think that Red Bull would have put in the call for Perez to win the race, being his home race? Would Verstappen allow it? How would Verstappen react to that? He's won the World Championship, they've won the Constructors' Championship, so in a sense they've nothing to lose, but there is this record that Verstappen has just set. 14 race wins in one season, so that's the big one. 15, 16 potentially coming up, as I said. I did say I was going to finish on that thought. Maybe one final thought. Ferrari. What the heck happened to Ferrari yesterday? By far, I think, possibly one of their weaker races this season. It depends how you define weak. Of course, they did finish the race, which is good for Ferrari considering how many engine failures and everything else that they've had this year. They've, as anybody who listens to our watch-alongs will know, they've given a new meaning to saying a driver is on fire. They're not going fast; they're literally on fire. Carlos Sainz, very dramatic scenes. I think was it the Austrian Grand Prix? It was there or thereabouts. Maybe it was to do with the altitude that they had in Mexico. Maybe it was car setup. Maybe it's 1 week in between races just didn't suit them. So we'll see what they come back with in 2 weeks' time at the Brazil Grand Prix. So all in all, as I said, I quite enjoyed the race. I enjoyed it. A lot of criticism online about it being boring. Maybe it was a little bit boring, but for me, there was anticipation over what's going to happen. We didn't know what the pit strategies were. They turned out to be a little bit more boring than we had anticipated, but as I said, it was about the anticipation. It was about what could happen. And in the end, I kind of petered out a little bit. I would still give it a 7 out of 10. I did enjoy the dynamics of the race. It was nice to see Red Bull and Mercedes battling each other. Bit of a shame that Ferrari weren't more involved, and Ricciardo kind of saved the day for everybody as well. There was a lot of action there with Ricciardo, and there is always action with the likes of Ocon, Norris, Bottas, Gasly. Gasly was a little bit in the wars yesterday as well. He managed to finish in 11th. So, yeah, I'll leave it with that. A notable thing to look at for next time out is that Perez now has taken second place in the championship away from Leclerc. So we do need to see some kind of reaction from the Ferraris. They need to do something. And that's where we're at. Okay, thank you very much for watching the video. As always, I will ask you to please hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button as well, and hit the bell if you want to be notified of future videos, including our live watch-alongs. And we are planning to do one of those for the Brazil Grand Prix again, and of course there will be one coming hopefully for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which probably won't be as dramatic as last year given that everything is settled, but you never know in Formula 1. You just never know. We'll leave it there. Thank you.